The Russian Ministry of Defense lied once again, claiming that the Russian army has made advances in the Sumy region and allegedly captured the village of Miropillya. According to Ukrainian defenders, the settlement remains under the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. The soldiers recorded a corresponding rebuttal the day before.
We, the servicemen of the 21st Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, are sending greetings to the Northern Troop Group directly from the village of Miropillya. We refute the information about the alleged capture of the settlement. It remains under our control. We continue to carry out combat missions to defend the integrity of our state directly in the village of Miropillya and its surroundings.
The soldiers note that the Russians have long been unable to establish a full-fledged, powerful foothold for an offensive in the Sumy region, which is why they try to enter the border villages in small groups. However, they don't last long.
The price is very high. The Russians are willing to sacrifice 10 or 20 groups just to advance even a kilometer or two into our country. In most cases, almost none of them make it. And if anyone does, they're eliminated there. Sometimes we're just amazed at their naivety and what they're counting on. Call sign Marlboro, scout of the 130th Reconnaissance Battalion. You're watching the United News Marathon.
Ukrainian soldiers are holding their positions just as steadfastly in other hotspots as well. The fighters note that while electronic warfare catches drones and FPV pilots search for new frequencies, Ukrainian artillery works around the clock, literally burning out the enemy wherever they are. For the Russians, the Pokrovsky bridgehead remains the main focus. According to the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, in this direction, the defense forces have stopped the most attempts by the occupying army to break through Ukrainian positions since the beginning of the day.
As of today, Ukraine maintains a steady initiative, that is, initiative on the battlefield. We are definitely not giving up the initiative either technically or in terms of weaponry. We are developing our own tactics, taking into account, first and foremost, their experience using them against us, and over time, we're applying them more effectively, while they remain at the basic level they're at.
The number of Russian attacks in the Konstantinivka and Huliaipol directions is not decreasing. The defense forces are neutralizing all enemy attempts to break through Ukrainian positions in these areas. Military experts are noting the successes of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Zaporizhia region.
Speaking specifically about the situation south of Zaporizhia, we remember that the enemy tried to capture Stepnohirsk to advance toward the Konka River, which flows into the former Kakhovka Reservoir, or what's left of it after the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant was blown up 3 years ago, and to put the city under direct artillery fire, both tube artillery and rocket artillery. In fact, there have already been cases where Zaporizhia was shelled by rocket artillery. That's why we're counterattacking there, trying to push the enemy further south to eliminate this threat. And yes, our army has achieved certain tactical successes there. There has been some advancement of several kilometers in certain areas.
In the past 24 hours alone, defense forces along the entire front line destroyed 3 Russian tanks, armored vehicles, and multiple rocket launchers, destroyed 80 artillery systems and 4 air defense systems, and shot down nearly 2,000 Russian army drones.
Oh, yes. Plus.
Also, the day before, Ukrainian soldiers eliminated almost 1,000 Russian occupiers. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total combat losses of the Russian army since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine have already exceeded 1,336,000 soldiers.
Pavlo Lakichuk, head of military security programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21, is joining the Freedom Broadcast. Pablo, welcome.
Fair.
Good morning, glory to Ukraine.
Heroes.
Glory to the heroes. What can you say about the ceasefire and Russia's ability to observe it?
Well, Russia's ability to observe it, they've already demonstrated their willingness, not their ability to observe it. At midnight today, Ukraine declared a ceasefire. By 2 in the morning, Russian Shaheds were already in our airspace. Mobile fire teams engaged them, repelling the enemy attack. Is that willingness or ability? In my professional opinion, I believe the Russians certainly do have the full strategic capability to establish and maintain a lasting ceasefire and to bring this devastating conflict to a complete halt. However, they clearly demonstrate a profound lack of genuine political willingness, and they simply lack the fundamental desire to do so.
At the same time, we see that the losses of the occupying army are increasing. For example, in April, on the Alexandrovsk direction, the Russian army wasn't able to advance even a meter, and at the same time suffered heavy losses in personnel and equipment. This was reported by the 37th Separate Marine Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. So, according to the soldiers on that particular section, I'm just quoting their statement, almost 300 occupiers were eliminated. And that's just in one area. 3 tanks were destroyed, as well as the same number of artillery systems, an infantry fighting vehicle, and 16 other pieces of equipment. These losses that the occupiers are suffering aren't visible inside Russia itself. They're being covered up. And isn't this enough to become the push that could finally force a decisive decision to stop killing their own people in the Russian Federation?
Well, the Russians are getting hit not just in the Alexandrovsk direction. Let me explain why. The Alexandrovsk direction is north of Huliaipole, where there are ongoing clashes, where the defense forces have already stopped the Russian advance for 3 months now, which was moving from Kurakhove basically toward Zaporizhia. They concentrated their forces and stopped the enemy's advance. Moreover, there are ongoing clashes there. The defense forces are retaking some of the settlements. This is the south of Dnipropetrovsk region and the north of Zaporizhia region. In other directions, it might be less noticeable, but take, for example, the south. South of the city of Zaporizhia along the former Kakhovka Reservoir. There, too, Ukraine's defense forces are making gains and pushing the enemy off our land. Of course, all of this is difficult and comes at a great cost to our defenders. We're defending our homeland. The invading Russian occupation forces are currently fighting on foreign soil, seizing the territory of another sovereign country and ruthlessly taking the lives of innocent citizens from another nation. At the very same time, the Russian army's personnel losses continue to mount at an alarming rate. But quite obviously, the Russian political leadership and their high-level military command seem to demonstrate a complete and total lack of concern regarding these devastating losses. They couldn't care less about those citizens of the Russian Federation who are fighting in Ukraine. Those are their own citizens. They couldn't care less about those citizens of the Russian Federation who become victims of the war among the civilian population. They only care about themselves. Putin's personal survival and continued prosperity, and that of his inner circle of associates, that is their absolute highest priority and value. Everything else has no value to him.
By May 9th, the Russian command will surely try to present a series of so-called victories to their top leadership. There is information. Even Russian social media channels are saying that the Russians are once again trying to take Kupiansk, and for this purpose, they're attacking specifically at Kupiansk-Uzlib line to split the Ukrainian bridgehead. How accurate is this information? How likely is it that the Russians could once again take this city, so to speak?
Well, the Russians have changed their tactics a bit here. If in previous years, and yes, we can certainly already talk about years at this point, the Russian forces consistently tried to encircle the entire grouping of Ukrainian forces in this specific area, our brave defenders, in an attempt to either completely destroy them or force them into a total surrender, and in doing so, they hope to achieve a kind of significant psychological victory over the nation. Like, look, the Ukrainians are surrendering. We've crushed them. However, at this current moment, it is quite apparent that such highly ambitious and grand-scale plans are already gradually being relegated to the background. So, if we look back at how previous strikes and complex combat operations involve the Russian forces trying to establish strategic bridgeheads on our right bank of the Oskil River from both the north and the south, and then advance, specifically on the south, moving north from those established positions, Now, the main strategic focus has shifted significantly toward a direct frontal assault on the left bank of the Oskil. This particular approach is proving to be the most incredibly costly in terms of their human resources and overall manpower. Well, this shows that they can achieve their strategic objectives, so they're switching the tactical ones. But the fundamental key principle, the main idea, continues to stay exactly the same regardless: to secure and capture at least some small portion of the objective, regardless of how heavy the potential losses might be. Well, since May 9th is coming up soon, how does that song of theirs go? We won't spare any costs.
Yeah, and that same song also says smelling a gunpowder. So, on the night of May 5th, Ukrainian defense forces struck the Progress plant in Cheboksary and the Kurishi oil refinery in the Leningrad region of the Russian Federation. Ukrainian defenders noted that not only the plant was on fire, but also the Kurishi oil pumping station. There, hits were recorded on 3 units responsible for primary raw material processing, and a tank with petroleum products was struck on the facility grounds. The Kurishi oil refinery is among the 3 largest oil refineries in Russia. Its capacity exceeds 20 million tons of oil per year. And so we realize that we've seen Ust-Luga, what's happening there. Perm, Tuapse was burning and smelled of gunpowder. So it turns out that Ukraine is systematically striking deep inside the Russian Federation, hitting those key facilities that help Putin keep fuel in the war with both money and fuel. To what extent has this already really affected the Russian Federation's ability to continue the war?
Well, if it smelled like gunpowder, that's about progress, right? What we mentioned at the beginning is exactly about strikes on Russian military industry, strikes on the production of ammunition, their components, and the manufacturing of drones, aircraft, and missiles. These are direct and significant impacts on the Russian war machine, systematically weakening its capabilities by the defense forces. And, well, disabling and striking at the Russian oil industry, as it's already commonly called, a phrase that has become somewhat of a tired but firmly established term. These are Ukraine's critical sanctions against the Russian oil refining sector. The ultimate goal of these operations is to deprive the Russian war machine of the massive flow of those bloody petrodollars that they earn thanks to it. And the task of the defense forces in this case is to reverse this flow. I'd even say this river of dollars that feeds the Russian war machine. The goal is to turn it around so that the Russian oil industry no longer brings profit to the military industrial complex, but instead so that it requires funds for its own recovery, forcing money to be taken from the Russian budget for repairs and restoration of these facilities. Take the Kurishi oil refinery, for example. If I'm not mistaken, this is already the 4th strike on it in the past 2 years. As soon as the Russians managed to repair it, new drones immediately hit again, basically saying, no, you're not going to operate.
The other day, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that this year, 25,000 robotic systems have been contracted. What do you think about the introduction of ground-based robotic complexes on the front lines?
Well, obviously, you can talk separately about ground-based robotic complexes, aerial drones, and naval drones, both strike and non-strike, each on their own. But I think that here, well, we really need to talk about this as a phenomenon as a whole. Back in the day, when looking at the development of the armed forces in countries around the world, well, in the 20th century, the struggle was about how to protect the crew of a weapons carrier, whether it was a naval carrier, an aircraft, a ground tank, or an infantry fighting vehicle, and at the same time, inflict maximum damage on the enemy. Now we've reached a significant historical period, a transformative era, when you can ensure the safety and protection of the entire crew in a completely different way, specifically when the crew is in a completely separate and distinct geographical location from where the weapons carrier itself is actively conducting its mission operations. Simply put, naval drones, Russians call them BKs, which stands for unmanned boats, In reality, there is still a crew, but the crew can be located somewhere completely different, tens, hundreds, or even thousands of kilometers away from the system itself. Obviously, this is a paradigm shift in the way warfare is conducted, at sea, in the air, and on land as well.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.